The conference room on the space station was completely silent. Everyone stared at Emperor Zarthek as he made his announcement. The Emperor was huge, covered in shimmering scales that changed colors under the lights. His amber eyes looked at each person in the room with barely hidden contempt. "My children need proper care," the Emperor said. His voice was deep and powerful, echoing through the translation devices everyone wore. "I will place them on the human ship Horizon's edge during our treaty talks. Your people will watch over them." Captain Daniel Brooks felt his heart sink. The humans had worked for 3 long years to get this peace treaty. Now the Emperor was testing them with something that seemed impossible. Everyone in the galaxy knew that baby dragons were extremely dangerous. Their instincts were wild and unpredictable.
Even as babies, they could kill with ease. Ambassador Patricia Collins smiled, though her face looked stiff.
"Your Majesty, we are deeply honored by your trust. But perhaps one of your own people would be better suited to care for such precious children." The Emperor's long tail swept behind him in a movement that meant his decision was final. "My people have been too soft with them. They must learn to be strong. Besides, this will show me if your kind deserves our alliance. If you cannot handle 3 baby dragons, how can I trust you as partners in anything important?" Lieutenant Kevin Harris looked at Chief Engineer Amy Peterson with worried eyes. Everyone in the room understood what was really happening. This was a test they could not afford to fail. But it was also a test that might destroy everything they had worked for. The baby dragons arrived less than an hour later. Each one was about as big as a large dog. Their scales were beautiful, changing colors based on how they felt. Their eyes glowed with intelligence that seemed too smart for creatures only a few weeks old. The moment they appeared on the transport platform, everything went wrong. The first dragon, named Scarlix by the Emperor, jumped at a security officer immediately. Flames shot from its mouth. The second dragon, Vertha, screamed so loud that 3 computer screens shattered into pieces. The third dragon, Marika, just stared at all the humans with what looked like pure hatred in her eyes. "Put them in Cargo Bay 3, Captain Brooks ordered. He tried to keep his voice calm and steady. "And somebody find me an expert on alien biology right now." The crew spent the next several hours trying everything they could think of. They used energy fields to contain the dragons. They tried giving them sleeping medicine. They played music from the dragon homeworld. Nothing worked at all. The dragons just became more violent and aggressive with each attempt. 6 crew members were injured in the first 3 hours. 2 had minor burns. 3 had cuts from the dragon's sharp claws. 1 had a mild concussion from being knocked into a wall. The medical bay was filling up fast. Captain Brooks stood in his ready room staring at reports from the cargo bay. The situation was getting worse by the minute. If even 1 person died, the treaty would be finished. But if he asked the Emperor to take the dragons back, that would also end everything. The Emperor would see them as weak and unworthy. "We need a miracle," Brooks said to himself. What nobody on the ship knew was that their miracle was already there. Her name was Helen Martinez. She was a pediatric nurse who worked with sick children back on Earth. She was on the Horizon's edge as part of a medical exchange program. Helen was organizing supplies in the medical bay when she first heard about the dragon problem. At first, she did not pay much attention to it. She was busy with her own work, updating medical files and checking inventory. But as the day went on, she heard more and more about the chaos in Cargo Bay 3. She heard about the injuries. She heard about the failed attempts to calm the dragons. She heard the worry in everyone's voices. When Lieutenant Harris came into the medical bay that evening, he looked exhausted. His uniform had small burn marks on the sleeves. His face was covered in sweat. He collapsed into a chair with a heavy sigh. "We have had 6 injuries already," Harris said, rubbing his tired eyes. "These creatures are impossible to deal with. They attack anyone who comes near them. We have tried absolutely everything. Force fields, medicine, music, everything. Nothing works. They just get angrier and more violent." Helen stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "Have they eaten anything yet?" "They will not touch the food the Emperor sent for them. We have tried feeding them by hand. We tried using robotic arms. We tried everything we could think of. They just burn whatever we offer them." Harris looked defeated. "Captain Brooks is thinking about asking the Emperor to take them back. That would basically end the treaty before it even starts." Helen felt something tug at her professional instincts. She had spent 15 years working with sick and frightened children. One thing she had learned in all that time was simple. When young ones acted aggressive, it usually meant they were scared or uncomfortable. It was not about being mean. It was about being afraid. Can I see them? Helen asked. Harris looked at her like she was crazy. Helen, these are not sick human children. These are predators. Alien predators who can breathe fire and kill people. Just let me look at them, Helen said calmly. Harris did not think it was a good idea, but he was desperate. He took Helen to Cargo Bay 3. Through the thick reinforced window, Helen could see the 3 baby dragons. They were each in different corners of the bay, as far away from each other as they could get. Every few minutes one would hiss or snap its jaws at nothing. The others would respond with their own threatening displays. But Helen noticed something important that everyone else had missed. The dragons were not looking at each other when they made these threats. They were looking at the walls. They were looking at the ceiling. They were looking at the doors. And their scales kept changing to dark blue and purple colors. Helen had read the basic information about dragon biology that was available to the crew. She remembered that dark blue and purple scales usually meant distress or fear in their species. They are scared, Helen said quietly. Scared. They have sent 3 security officers to the medical bay with serious injuries. Because they are terrified, Helen said with certainty. Look at how they are standing. Look at their body language. They are not attacking people. They are defending themselves. Something about this room is making them panic. Helen thought back to her most difficult cases over the years. She remembered premature babies in the intensive care unit. She remembered children who had lived through terrible trauma. She remembered kids who had lost their parents. The behavior was very similar to what she was seeing now. Aggression that came from overwhelming fear and feeling unsafe. What did the Emperor tell you about how to take care of them? Helen asked. Harris pulled up a file on his tablet computer. Just that they needed protein, water, and supervision. That is all he said. Pretty vague instructions, honestly. Helen looked carefully at the cargo bay through the window. It was a standard storage room with metal walls everywhere. The lights overhead were very bright. The temperature was set to be comfortable for humans. It was efficient and clean and completely sterile. This is all wrong, Helen said quietly. Then she spoke louder. Lieutenant, I need you to trust me. Give me 24 hours alone with them. Absolutely not. The captain would never approve something that dangerous. Then ask him if he has a better idea than what I am offering. Part 2. 10 minutes later, Lieutenant Harris came back with surprising news. Captain Brooks had approved Helen's request. The situation was desperate enough that any chance was worth taking. Helen was given access to Cargo Bay 3, a medical kit, and a direct communication link to security in case something went wrong. Helen stood before the door and looked through the window at the 3 hostile baby dragons. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of the first rule of working with children. Every behavior is communication. She just needed to figure out what these babies were trying to tell her. Helen entered the cargo bay very slowly. She kept her movements careful and calm. All 3 dragons turned toward her immediately. Their scales flashed bright red and orange, which she knew meant warning and anger. Scarlix opened his mouth wide. Helen could see flames starting to glow in the back of his throat. Easy, sweetheart, she said in a quiet voice. She did not move from her spot near the door. I am not here to hurt you. The dragon paused. His head tilted slightly to one side. Helen knew the translation devices did not work on the babies yet. They were too young to understand language. But her calm tone seemed to register with them somehow. She sat down on the floor with her legs crossed. This made her smaller and less threatening. For 10 long minutes, Helen just sat there. She occasionally spoke in the same gentle voice she had used with countless frightened children over the years. The dragons watched her carefully, but none of them attacked. This was already better than what anyone else had achieved. Helen used this time to observe everything carefully. Now that she was inside the bay with them, she could feel what they were experiencing. The lighting was harsh and bright. It flickered slightly in a way that human eyes probably could not notice. But it was clearly disturbing to the dragons with their more sensitive vision. The air circulation system hummed at a frequency that made her teeth ache slightly. The temperature was comfortable for humans, but probably too cold for creatures who naturally produced fire inside their bodies. Slowly, never taking her eyes off the baby dragons, Helen reached up to her wrist communicator. She dimmed the lights in the cargo bay. The change happened immediately. All 3 dragons shifted their scale colors slightly away from aggressive reds toward more neutral greens. Firtha stopped making the low whining sound she had been producing. There we go, Helen said softly. That is better, is it not? Next, Helen used her communicator to request that environmental controls raise the temperature by 10 degrees. More color changes happened right away. The dragons shifted toward calmer blues and greens. Morika, who had been holding her body rigid and tense, visibly relaxed her muscles. But the dragons still would not come near Helen, and they definitely would not eat any food. Helen thought about the problem carefully. In the neonatal intensive care unit where she had worked, she had learned something important. Premature babies often needed physical contact to survive and grow. Skin-to-skin contact helped regulate their body temperature and heart rate. Could the same principle apply to these dragon babies? These baby dragons had been taken away from their parent. They had been transported through space in a cold ship. Then they were placed in a strange environment with alien creatures trying to handle them with metal tools and robotic arms. They had probably never experienced anything except their parents' warmth and the presence of their siblings. Helen made a decision that would have terrified the security team watching on the monitor cameras. She took off her jacket, leaving just a thin shirt. Then she lay down flat on the floor of the bay. She was offering her body heat and making herself completely vulnerable and defenseless. "I know you miss your parent," she said in a gentle voice. "I know everything here is wrong and scary, but I promise you are safe here. I promise." For a long moment, nothing happened. The three dragons just stared at her. Then Morika, the smallest of the three babies, took one small step forward. Her scales had shifted to a curious yellow and green color. She moved toward Helen slowly, sniffing the air with her nostrils. Helen held her breath and stayed perfectly still. The dragon came closer and closer. Morika's head was now just inches away from Helen's face. Helen could feel intense heat radiating from the creature's body. It was like standing near a furnace. Then very gently the baby dragon curled her body against Helen's side. She tucked her small form against the nurse's warmth. The effect on the other two dragons was immediate and dramatic. Scarlix and Verthos watched their sibling with intense focus and interest. They saw that Morika was safe and comfortable. Within just a few minutes, they too had approached Helen. Soon all three dragons were pressed against her body from different sides. Their scales gradually shifted to soft purples and pinks. Helen recognized these as colors of contentment and happiness. Helen felt their bodies relax completely. Their breathing became slow and steady. The heat they generated was very intense, but it was not unbearable. Helen began to hum softly. It was an old lullaby her grandmother had sung to her when she was a small child. She felt the dragons settle even deeper into peaceful sleep. Lieutenant Harris's voice came through her communicator. He spoke in barely a whisper. "Helen, that was either the bravest thing I have ever seen or the craziest thing I have ever seen." "It is what they needed," Helen replied quietly. She was careful not to disturb the sleeping dragons. "They are not weapons or monsters. They are babies who miss their parent. Do you think you can get them to eat now? Maybe, but not with metal tongs and force fields. Send in someone they might be willing to trust. Who should I send?" Helen smiled slightly. She could feel Morika's tiny claws gently kneading against her side in contentment, just like a happy kitten. "Send me Lieutenant Lucy Carson from engineering. The one who always smells like engine grease and has that calm energy about her, and tell her to bring the food in her bare hands, not with any tools." Harris was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," Helen said with confidence. "These babies need to learn they can trust us. But trust has to be earned. It cannot be forced." Over the next few hours, Helen stayed on the floor with the three dragons. They woke up occasionally, looked around, and then settled back against her warmth. Each time they woke, they seemed a little calmer and more relaxed. Their scales showed happier colors for longer periods. The security team watching on cameras could not believe what they were seeing. These same creatures had been violent and dangerous just hours ago. Now they looked like peaceful sleeping pets. Captain Brooks came down to Cargo Bay 3 himself to see it with his own eyes. "This is remarkable," Brooks said quietly, speaking to Harris outside the bay.
How did she do it?
"She treated them like frightened children instead of dangerous animals," Harris explained. "She made the environment comfortable for them. She offered them warmth and safety. She did not try to control them or force them to do anything." Brooks nodded slowly. "And you think they will eat now?" "Martinez seems to think so. She wants Carson to try feeding them by hand in the morning." "Make it happen," Brooks ordered. "And Harris, make sure Martinez gets whatever she needs. Food, rest breaks, medical supplies, anything. She might have just saved this entire treaty negotiation." Inside the cargo bay, Helen continued to hum her grandmother's lullaby. The 3 baby dragons slept peacefully against her, their bodies warm and their breathing steady. For the first time since they had arrived on the horizon's edge, they felt safe. Helen knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much work to do. The dragons needed to learn to eat. They needed to learn to trust more members of the crew. They needed to learn basic rules about living on a spaceship. But the hardest part was done. She had broken through their fear and shown them that not everything in this strange new world was dangerous. As she lay there on the hard floor of the cargo bay, Helen thought about all the frightened children she had cared for over the years. Human children from Earth who had been sick or hurt or scared, and now baby dragons from across the galaxy. The species was different, but the need was exactly the same. Every child, no matter where they came from, needed to feel safe and loved. Part 3 Lieutenant Lucy Carson entered Cargo Bay 3 the next morning with her heart pounding. She carried a container of the protein supplement the Emperor had sent for his children. She tried not to think about the fact that 3 creatures capable of melting through the ship's hull were now watching her every movement. Helen was still on the floor, though she had managed to shift into a slightly more comfortable position during the night. The 3 baby dragons were draped around her like oversized cats. Their scales showed those gentle pink and purple colors that Carson had been told meant they were calm and happy. "Just walk slowly," Helen said in a quiet voice. "Let them see you are not scared. Kids and animals can always tell when you are frightened, and it makes them nervous too." Carson knelt down on the floor a few feet away from the group. She set the container down carefully. The movement caused Scarlix to lift his head from where it had been resting on Helen's leg. His eyes focused on the newcomer with sharp intelligence. Carson could see the assessment happening behind those alien eyes. The dragon was deciding whether she was a threat or not. "Hey there, little one," Carson said. She tried to copy Helen's gentle tone of voice. "I brought you some breakfast." She scooped some of the protein supplement into the palm of her hand and held it out toward the dragons. The substance had a texture like pudding. Scarlix sniffed at it carefully, then turned his head away with what looked like disgust. Firthus did not even bother to look at the offered food. "They do not trust it," Helen observed, watching the dragon's reactions. In the wild, dragon young learn what is safe to eat by watching their parents. They do not have those instincts programmed into them yet. They need to learn. Carson frowned with confusion. "So what do we do?" Helen had been thinking about this problem all through the long night. "We have to show them it is safe to eat. Here, give me some of that." Carson passed over a small amount of the supplement. It smelled vaguely of sulfur, which made sense for creatures who breathed fire. Helen made a face but took a small taste of it. She made big, exaggerated chewing motions with her mouth and then smiled widely. She said, rubbing her stomach in an old gesture that seemed to work across species. "Good food." Morika's eyes widened with interest. She uncurled her body from Helen's side and crept forward slowly. She sniffed at the supplement remaining in Helen's hand. Then very delicately she took a small lick with her tongue. The change was instant and dramatic. Morika's eyes brightened with excitement. She eagerly ate the rest of the food from Helen's palm. Then she turned to the container that Carson was holding. Within moments, all 3 dragons were eating with enthusiasm. They competed with each other for access to the food, pushing and shoving in a way that seemed playful rather than aggressive. "I will be damned," Carson breathed in amazement. It actually worked. Over the next few days, Helen and a rotating team of volunteers established a daily routine with the baby dragons. The key discovery, Helen found, was treating them not as dangerous aliens to be contained and controlled, but as children to be raised and nurtured. They needed physical warmth and contact. They needed play and stimulation. They needed the reassurance of seeing the same friendly faces every day. Greg Palmer from the operations department discovered that the dragons loved games involving light and shadow. He would project images across the cargo bay floor using a handheld device. The dragons would chase the moving lights with the enthusiasm of kittens playing. Their scales flashed with excited yellows and oranges. They would pounce and tumble over each other, making happy chirping sounds. Nurse Linda Shaw found that the dragons responded very well to music, particularly lower frequencies that seemed to resonate with their own rumbling vocalizations. She started playing recordings of cello music during their rest periods. The dragons would curl together in a big pile, humming along in 3-part harmony. It was one of the most beautiful sounds anyone on the ship had ever heard. But it was Chief Engineer Amy Peterson who made the most surprising discovery of all. She had been checking on the environmental controls in the cargo bay one afternoon. While she worked, she had been thinking out loud about a problem with the ship's power distribution grid. It was a complex technical issue that had been frustrating her for several days. Scarlix had approached her while she muttered to herself. He tilted his head to one side and made a series of chirping sounds. The sounds almost seemed like questions, though that should have been impossible for such a young creature. On a sudden impulse, Peterson decided to try something. She pulled out her tablet computer and showed Scarlix a schematic diagram of the power grid. The dragon studied the image with intense concentration. His eyes moved across the screen, following the lines and connections. Then he gently touched one of his claws to a specific junction point on the diagram. Peterson's mouth fell open in shock. That junction point was the exact location of the fault she had been trying to find for 3 days. "How did you know that?" she whispered. Scarlix just looked at her with those intelligent eyes and made a pleased chirping sound. Peterson immediately reported her discovery to Captain Brooks. "Sir, they are not just intelligent creatures. They are active problem solvers, collaborative ones who want to help. I think the Emperor sent them here not just to test our character and patience. I think he wanted to see if we could recognize their true potential as thinking beings." Brooks nodded thoughtfully as he listened to her report. The treaty negotiations with the Emperor had been progressing very well over the past few weeks. The Emperor had been receiving regular updates about how his offspring were doing. If anything, the human crew's success with the baby dragons had opened diplomatic doors that pure negotiation never could have opened. "How is Martinez holding up through all this?" Brooks asked with concern. "She is absolutely remarkable, sir. Those dragons follow her everywhere now, like baby ducks following their mother. She has even started teaching them basic rules about ship life. No breathing fire indoors, no rough play near sensitive equipment, that sort of thing. And they actually listen to her like she is their mother." Brooks smiled at that image. Maybe in a way, she really is their mother now. The crew had also noticed something else interesting. The 3 dragons had distinct personalities that became more obvious as they grew comfortable. Scarlix was curious and analytical, always wanting to understand how things worked. Berthus was social and musical, responding most strongly to sounds and voices. Marika was the most cautious and observant, always watching everything carefully before acting. Helen encouraged the crew members to interact with each dragon according to their individual personality. She taught them to read the subtle color changes in the scales that indicated different emotions. Dark blue meant fear or distress. Bright red and orange meant anger or aggression. Yellow and green meant curiosity and interest. Pink and purple meant contentment and affection. The cargo bay, which had been a place of danger and chaos, slowly transformed into something more like a nursery. The crew brought in soft materials for the dragons to sleep on. They adjusted the lighting to cycle naturally between bright and dim, matching the day and night cycle. They added toys and puzzles for mental stimulation. One evening, Helen sat in the bay watching the 3 dragons play together. They were wrestling in a pile, their scales flashing through happy colors. They made chirping and rumbling sounds that might have been laughter. It was hard to believe these were the same terrified, aggressive creatures that had arrived just weeks ago. Lieutenant Harris came to check on them, as he did every evening. "You did an amazing thing here, Helen," he said quietly. "I just treated them the way any child should be treated," Helen replied, "with patience, understanding, and love. The amazing thing is that nobody else thought to try it." "Well, the Emperor is coming to visit soon," Harris told her. "He specifically requested to meet you. Whatever you have done, it has made a big impression on him." Helen felt nervous butterflies in her stomach. Meeting an alien emperor was not something she had ever expected to do in her life. But she nodded calmly. "When does he arrive?" 3 days from now." Part 4, the next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. The entire crew of the Horizon's Edge worked to make sure everything was perfect for the Emperor's visit. Captain Brooks wanted every detail to be flawless. The future of human and dragon relations depended on making a good impression. Helen spent extra time with the 3 baby dragons, making sure they were healthy and happy. She groomed their scales carefully, removing any dirt or debris. She played with them and sang to them. She wanted them to be calm and content when their father arrived. On the morning of the Emperor's visit, Helen was summoned to meet with Captain Brooks in his ready room. She felt nervous as she walked through the corridors. She was just a nurse from Earth. She had never expected to be involved in anything this important. The Emperor specifically requested to meet you, Brooks told her when she arrived. Whatever you have done with his children, it has made a significant impression on him. Just be yourself and speak honestly. That seems to work well with the dragons, so maybe it will work with their father too. When Emperor Zarthek materialized on the transport platform, he was even more imposing than he appeared on video screens. His scales were a deep crimson color that seemed to glow with inner fire. He stood at least 9 feet tall. His presence seemed to fill the entire docking bay with power and authority. His long tail swept back and forth behind him in a way that made everyone nervous. Ambassador Patricia Collins and Captain Brooks greeted him with formal diplomatic words and gestures. But the Emperor's amber eyes were already scanning the area, looking for something else. He was not interested in pleasantries and ceremonies. "Where are my offspring?" the Emperor rumbled. His deep voice made the walls vibrate slightly. "In Cargo Bay 3, Your Majesty," Brooks replied quickly. "Shall we escort you there?" But the Emperor was already moving down the corridor with long, powerful strides. His tail swept behind him as he walked. The human delegation had to hurry to keep up with his pace. When they reached Cargo Bay 3, the Emperor paused at the observation window. Inside the bay, Helen sat on the floor with all 3 baby dragons. Morika was curled comfortably in her lap. Scarlix and Verthus were playing with a light projection that Greg Palmer was controlling from a nearby console. The dragon scales showed every possible color of contentment and joy. Their movements were relaxed and playful and full of trust. The Emperor stood completely silent for a long moment. He just watched his children play through the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. It was softer somehow, though still powerful. "Do you know why I truly sent them here, human?" Helen had been brought to stand beside the Emperor. She shook her head honestly. "No, Your Majesty. We thought it was a test of some kind." "My people have grown cold over the centuries," Zarthek said slowly. He continued to watch his offspring through the window. "We prize strength above everything else. For hundreds of years we have raised our young to be warriors from the very moment they hatch from their eggs. We teach them to trust no one. We teach them to show no weakness ever. We teach them to conquer their fear through aggression and violence." He gestured with one clawed hand toward the window. "Look at them now. When have you ever seen dragon young so peaceful and happy?" "They just needed to feel safe," Helen said simply. "All children do, no matter what species they come from." The Emperor turned to look at her directly. His eyes were intense and searching. "Every species in the galaxy that I have tested with my offspring has treated them as threats to be managed and controlled. The Centaurians used stasis fields to freeze them in place. The Akrantel tried genetic compliance drugs to make them obedient. The Veshkar attempted to train them through punishment and pain." He paused, and something like sadness crossed his alien features. "You are the very first species to recognize them as children who needed care and love, rather than beasts to be controlled through force." Helen met his gaze steadily, though her heart was pounding. "With respect, Your Majesty, that says more about the other species than it does about us humans." A sound emerged from the Emperor's throat that the translation device struggled with for a moment. Then it settled on the word laughter. "Indeed. Perhaps that is the most important revelation of all." The Emperor reached out and activated the door to the cargo bay. Immediately, 3 small forms rushed toward him with excited chirping sounds. Their scales flashed with happy yellows and golds. The Emperor lowered his massive body down to the floor. This was something the watching humans suspected was an extremely rare sight. He allowed his offspring to climb all over him, chirping and nuzzling against his scales. But then something unexpected and unprecedented happened. Morika detached herself from her father after a moment. She ran back to Helen on her short legs. She pressed her warm body against the nurse's legs and looked back and forth between the 2 adults. Scarlix and Verthus quickly followed their sister. The 3 dragons created a living bridge between their parent and their caretaker. "They have bonded with you," the Emperor observed. His voice held wonder and surprise. "This is completely unprecedented in our history. Dragon young typically bond only with their birth parent. They reject all others as potential threats." Helen knelt down on the floor. She gently stroked Morika's head with her hand. "Maybe they understand somehow that they are safe with both of us, that they do not have to choose between their father and the person who cares for them here." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. He watched his offspring move freely and comfortably between himself and this small human female, who had accomplished something he had believed was impossible. His eyes showed deep thought. The treaty negotiations are now concluded, the Emperor announced suddenly. His voice had changed back to formal and authoritative. But I have an additional proposal to make. Captain Brooks stepped forward with interest and some concern. Your Majesty? I wish to establish a permanent exchange program between our species, the Emperor said. Young dragons will be fostered by human caretakers for their first year of life. They will learn what my people have forgotten over the centuries. That true strength need not come at the cost of compassion and connection. In return, we will share our most advanced technologies with humanity. We will also provide full military alliance and protection. He looked directly at Helen. And I formally request that this human, Helen Martinez, lead this program from the human side. She will be granted the title of Clan Mother. This is the highest honor my people can bestow on anyone outside our species. Helen felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The weight of all those stares was almost physical. Your Majesty, I am deeply honored by this. But I am just a nurse. I do not know anything about diplomacy or politics or running major programs between species. You know the only thing that truly matters, the Emperor interrupted her gently. You know how to see past fear and aggression to the frightened child within. You know that the future of any species depends not on how fiercely they can fight, but on how well they can nurture and raise their young. He stood up to his full impressive height. His offspring scampered around his feet happily. You passed a test that I designed to be impossible. You found the trick that no one else in the entire galaxy could find. And the truth is that there was no trick at all, only compassion and understanding. Part 5. The diplomatic delegation spent the next several hours in intense discussion about what this new exchange program would mean. Captain Brooks, Ambassador Collins, and several other high-ranking officials talked with Emperor Zarthek about practical details. How many dragon young would come to human care? Which ships and stations would host them? What training would the human caretakers need? What technologies would the dragons share in return? Helen mostly stayed quiet during these discussions. She sat on the floor of the cargo bay with the 3 baby dragons, who seemed content to be near both their father and their human caretaker. She listened to the adults talk about treaties and alliances and political implications. But her mind was focused on something simpler and more important. How could she help more frightened baby dragons feel safe and loved? Lieutenant Kevin Harris found her there late in the evening, after most of the formal discussions had ended. He sat down beside her on the floor. Ferthus immediately climbed into his lap, making happy chirping sounds. Harris had become one of the dragon's favorite people over the past few weeks. Clan Mother Helen Martinez, Harris said with a smile. That has a nice sound to it. Helen smiled back, but she also looked worried. I am scared, Kevin. What if I cannot do this? What if it only worked with these 3 because I got lucky? What if the next group of dragons are different and nothing I try helps them? You will figure it out, Harris said with confidence. You know why? Because you actually care about them. You see them as individuals who deserve respect and kindness. That is something that cannot be taught from a book or a manual. That comes from who you are as a person. Over the following weeks, as preparations began for the exchange program, Helen's words proved true in ways that surprised everyone. The Emperor sent detailed information about dragon development and behavior. The human scientists and doctors studied this information carefully, but they kept finding that Helen had already discovered most of the important principles just by watching and responding to the baby dragon's needs. Dragon young needed warmth and physical contact. Helen had figured that out on the first night. They needed to feel safe in their environment. Helen had adjusted the lighting and temperature right away. They needed to learn by observation and example rather than by force. Helen had shown them it was safe to eat by tasting the food herself. They needed play and mental stimulation. Helen had encouraged the crew to bring toys and puzzles and music. It is like you already knew everything about raising dragons without ever reading a single page of research, Amy Peterson said one day. She was helping Helen design what would become the first official dragon nursery aboard a space station. It is not about dragons specifically, Helen explained. It is about understanding what any young creature needs to grow up healthy and happy. Safety, warmth, food, play, love, and consistent care. Those things are universal across species. The details might be different, but the basic needs are always the same. The first official group of dragon young arrived 3 months after the initial 3 returned home with their father. There were 10 babies this time. each from different families in the Dragon Empire. They ranged in age from 2 weeks to 2 months old. They arrived scared and aggressive, just like Scarlix, Verthas, and Morika had been. But this time, Helen and her team were ready. They had prepared a proper nursery with appropriate lighting, temperature, and soft sleeping areas. They had trained 15 crew members in the techniques Helen had developed. They had music ready and toys prepared, and food that they knew the babies would accept. Within just 2 days, all 10 baby dragons had calmed down. Within a week, they were eating regularly and playing happily. Within 2 weeks, they had bonded with their human caretakers and were learning basic rules about living on a space station. The success was remarkable and undeniable. News spread quickly through both human and dragon societies. Other species in the Galactic Council began to take notice. If humans could raise dragon young successfully when everyone else had failed, what did that say about humanity's place in the galaxy? More importantly, the young dragons who returned home after their year with human caretakers were different from any dragons that had come before them. They were still strong and intelligent and capable, but they were also compassionate and cooperative and emotionally open. They could work together with others instead of only competing. They could form genuine friendships across species lines. They could see problems from multiple perspectives. Emperor Zarthek watched these changes in his people's young ones with deep satisfaction. He had suspected that his species had lost something important over the centuries of valuing strength above all else. Now he had proof, and he had found unlikely partners to help his people recover what they had lost. 5 years after Helen first lay down on the floor of Cargo Bay 3 with 3 terrified baby dragons, the exchange program had expanded beyond anything anyone had imagined. There were now 50 human stations and ships hosting dragon young. Over 300 baby dragons had been raised by human caretakers. The dragons had shared advanced propulsion technology, energy systems, and medical knowledge with humanity in return. But more than that, a genuine friendship had formed between the two species. Young dragons who had been raised by humans often chose to work alongside humans as adults. Some became engineers on human ships. Some became teachers in human schools. Some became diplomats helping to bridge understanding between species. And it all started because one nurse refused to see monsters where there were only frightened babies who needed someone to hold them and tell them they were safe. Helen stood in the main nursery of Station Harmony, watching 20 baby dragons play together under the care of her trained staff. Some were wrestling playfully. Some were solving puzzles. Some were napping in warm piles. Their scales showed every color of happiness and contentment. Lieutenant Harris, now Commander Harris and Helen's second in command of the program, came to stand beside her. "Do you ever think about that first night?" he asked. "When you asked for 24 hours alone with 3 of the most dangerous creatures anyone had ever seen?" Helen smiled at the memory. "I think about it often. I was so scared, but I was also sure that I was right about what they needed. You changed the galaxy, Helen, you know that, right? Not with weapons or politics or force, but with kindness and understanding. I just did what any good nurse would do," Helen said modestly. "I saw patients who needed care and I provided it." "That is exactly what makes you remarkable," Harris replied. "You saw past everything that made them seem alien and dangerous. You saw the universal truth that all young ones need love and safety to grow. That is a lesson the whole galaxy needed to learn." In the corner of the nursery, a tiny new arrival named Krelith was just starting to explore his surroundings. His scales were still dark with fear and uncertainty. Helen excused herself and walked over to him slowly. She sat down on the soft floor and began to hum the same lullaby her grandmother had taught her so many years ago. Krelith watched her warily at first, but gradually his scales began to shift toward curious yellows and greens. He took one small step toward her, then another, and finally he curled up against her warmth, just like Morika had done 5 years before. Helen gently stroked his scales and continued humming. She thought about all the baby dragons she had helped over the years. She thought about the human children she had cared for before that. She thought about her grandmother singing to her when she was small and scared, love and safety. Warmth and care. These simple things connected every species in the galaxy, whether they breathed fire or water or air, whether they had scales or skin or shells, whether they came from planets of ice or planets of flame. The need to be seen and valued and protected was universal, and Helen Martinez, a simple nurse from Earth, had reminded the entire galaxy of that fundamental truth. Not through grand speeches or complex theories, but through the simple act of holding frightened babies and telling them they were safe. The Emperor had been right. There was no trick. There never had been. Only compassion, patience, and the willingness to see past fear to the child within. That was the secret that humanity had offered to the galaxy. And it was a secret that would echo through the stars for generations to come, making the universe a gentler place for all its children,